Hey guys, welcome to the Student Side Hustle. So in this show, what we're trying to do is I'm trying to share stories of individuals and people who generally are doing something unique, doing something entrepreneurial, doing something that they're passionate about and trying to make it their career. That's not necessarily the thing that allows you to be on the show or qualifies you to be a guest on the show, but that's generally what we're talking about. We're talking about entrepreneurship, passion, etc. A lot of it revolves around bodybuilding and fitness because that's what I'm personally interested in. But what I want you to take away from this is just the fact that you can do whichever passion that you'd like to do, and you can make that into a career. It's a long path, but you can make it happen. And basically what I'm doing is showing you 80 plus examples of people who are doing it and who have done it. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I would love if you would subscribe because we've got a lot of new episodes coming out. And yeah, thank you so much for listening.
People are constantly raising the bar.
Sacrifices need to be made.
What would you guys say are your biggest weaknesses?
You are your enemy right now.
It's success or die.
Just a fucking podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to the Student Side Hustle. This week I'm speaking to Martin Refalo from JPS. So Martin is the head physique coach and the coach and education coordinator at JPS. I hope you've heard of JPS. It's the way I like to describe it is a sort of, in the whole of Oceania, which is like New Zealand and Australia, they're probably one of the only refutable companies that I know. And obviously, if you've listened to my story recently, I've been having a bit of frustrations around the industry in this sort of general area, New Zealand and Australia. And I think JPS is sort of one of the shining lights that I hope you're paying attention to. And Martin is one of the he's the head physique coach at JPS and also the coach and education coordinator. So Martin has recently completed his bachelor in exercise science, and he's also competed in bodybuilding twice. So what we're primarily going to be talking about today is mainly around body composition and all sort of topics in this sort of basket, but we'll see what we get into because this podcast is very broad. Martin, how did you get into all this sort of stuff? How did you start working with JPS, and what made you want to do exercise science?
Sweet. Very privileged to be here to start off. Looking forward to the podcast. I started training about 6 years ago. So when I was 18 years old. Since then, training has become a passion of mine. I've also, as you said, completed my exercise science degree. So I kind of picked up a passion for the science behind training and nutrition as well along my training career. And yeah, I was fortunate enough to get a job at JPS about 2 years ago now. So did a mentorship program there and ended up becoming a head coach. And as you said, now I'm the head coach and education coordinator at JPS as well. And like you said, we're doing a lot of good things at JPS. We've just released our mentorship program, which is now online to anyone who wants to sign up for it. So a whole lot of different content on that platform. I'm looking to do my master's this year as well in research. So obviously specializing in resistance training. If all goes to plan, I should be able to start that soon. But yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Fantastic. And how did you get into working with JPS? So I think this is the kind of thing that it's one of the few brands in fitness that I actually fully believe in. It's like there's 3DMJ, Revive Stronger, Renaissance Periodization, and JPS, and it's almost sad to me that there's that few, which I think sucks, but hopefully it's changing because I think you guys sort of show, oh wow, there actually is a way to do it morally smart. It takes I think to teach people and to get results maybe takes longer, but long term they work way, way better, and no one's going to get injury rates are going to be lower. People aren't going to. It's way better long term, but it doesn't have these flashy lights of 6 weeks. We're talking much more long term and much more logical, smart, evidence-based approach, and that's something that I love about JPS. How did you get into working with them?
Yeah, so it's funny. I saw Jacob used to put a lot of Facebook advertisements up, and I just saw JPS through Facebook, and I decided to email them because I did like what they were always posting about in terms of content and stuff. And at that time they were holding a mentorship, so I actually decided to get into it. And all the content that they presented me with at that time was new to me because I was I had just started my uni degree, so I hadn't really been exposed to any of the science behind training and nutrition. And yeah, like the mentorship program that I completed then is really what got me going. That's about it, really.
Sweet, fantastic. And one thing that I think we'd primarily like to speak about today is body composition. So I think this is something that maybe we'll get into it later in the podcast, but I think there's a lot of very ineffective ways that people like to sort of pretend that makes a noticeable difference in body composition. What do you think are some relatively good general guidelines for making measurable differences in body composition, and why is that important in long-term fitness goals?
Yeah, right. So first of all, I think it's important to understand the difference between manipulating body weight and manipulating body composition. So, over the years of my coaching career, so I've been coaching for about 4 years now, I've found that I've had to explain the difference to a lot of clients, because a lot of clients do come into the gym wanting to change their body weight. Okay, now body weight can be changed in a matter of days just by decreasing food intake and things like that. But just because you lose 2 or 3 kilos, it doesn't really mean you're going to look much better. Like, you might look a little thinner and whatnot, but if you want to improve your physique and improve the way you look, then it's manipulating body composition. That's what you are after. Now, there are 2 components to that, and one of them is increasing the amount of lean muscle mass that you have, and also decreasing body fat. Now, body composition needs to be manipulated on a larger time scale. Okay, so it does time. So going through, phases of gaining where you aim to gain muscle, and this can be hard for a lot of people who have never experienced it before. But the reality is that you can't just, just try and lose fat for your whole training career, because you're really not going to get anywhere, and you're only going to be spinning your wheels over time. Yeah. So entering a gaining phase is super important, and then following that up with subsequent fat loss phases will ultimately alter your body composition. And as I said, though, this occurs on a larger time scale, and it's really important that to incorporate patience and discipline into the process.
What sort of timescales would we be talking about? Because I think a lot of people, obviously, with the whole Instagram, social media culture, and I think it's turning nowadays thanks to people like yourself and JPS and all those great brands we mentioned before. How long generally do you think people should be in a surplus? And I think people expect it to be a lot shorter than it actually is.
Yeah, well, that's right. So I usually recommend anywhere in between 6 to 12 months. Now, this is obviously going to be dependent on the individual. And, theoretically, you would love, your clients to be gaining about 1% of their body weight per month, anywhere in between 6 to 12 months. But, in the real world, sometimes that's a little hard to convince your clients to do that. So you also need to think practically, and you need to individualize the approach to the client. You need to take into account things like their psychological state. Some people just aren't going to be happy with the fact that you want them to gain weight. But this is something that, as I said, if they really want to improve their body composition and the way they look, it's something that you have to educate your clients about. Goals come into play as well. So if the client has bodybuilding goals, if they are close to a competition, then the rate of gain is going to need to be slowed down slightly, because you obviously don't want to be putting on too much body fat leading up into a show. But in typically speaking, 6 to 12 months in a gaining phase would be a good amount of time to see some gains in skeletal muscle, and then following that up with a fat loss phase to obviously reduce the amount of body fat that you have accumulated along the way.
Right.
Because unfortunately, we can't just go through a gaining phase and just build muscle without accumulating some body fat along the way. So it is important that throughout that gaining phase, you aim to limit the amount of body fat that you gain. Okay, so obviously being in a very large calorie surplus is probably going to bring upon more fat gain, muscle growth. So being in a slight calorie surplus for a prolonged period of time.
What sort of numbers would we be generally looking at, whether that's a percentage or calorie number?
Yeah, so over time, as I said, you'll be accumulating fat with your gaining phase. So we do need to enter fat loss phases if we want to improve our body composition over time. So that's going to mean entering an energy deficit, which is the most effective means of inducing fat loss. And the goal in this phase is not only to just lose body fat, but we also need to retain as much muscle as possible.
Yeah.
So throughout the gaining phase, we've worked really hard to build a new skeletal muscle tissue. And if we just embark on a fat loss phase, and there are a lot of suboptimal protocols out there that don't really take muscle retention into account. So extreme amounts of cardio, extreme calorie deprivation, things like that. These are not very conducive things when we're talking about muscle retention. So I think when you embark in a fat loss phase, like I said, you not only need to retention, as that is a very important component of improving your body composition over time.
Right. So then when we're talking about muscle retention, how do we go about doing that? Because I think it's very important that we understand the variables within this. And I think a lot of people, as you spoke about, think that it is purely due to excess cardio or all that sort of thing. And to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, effectively, the only thing cardio can really do is just create a bigger deficit if calories are controlled.
Correct. So yeah, like when I'm coaching a client, I don't really prescribe cardio anymore. I prescribe like a step count, something like that. That's going to increase their NEAT, or just the amount of energy they expend on a daily basis. And if they need to do some type of cardio, which I generally recommend just walking on a treadmill, something low intensity, something that isn't going to interfere with their training too much, then they can do that to get to their step count. Now, when it comes to retaining muscle in an energy deficit, there are three components that we need to take into account. So as I said, the first one being energy restriction, the most effective means to increasing fat loss. And it's been shown that energy restriction alone without resistance training will usually lead to 20 to 30% of the total body mass lost coming from lean body mass. Okay, so this just shows the importance of resistance training when muscle retention is the goal. And when I say resistance training, I'm talking about providing your muscles with sufficient tension. Okay, so your muscle fibers with sufficient tension.
Yep.
And unfortunately, there are a lot of suboptimal protocols out there that don't do so and only increase the individual's chances of muscle loss. Now, when it comes to the energy deficit itself, there are two things we need to take into account: the magnitude of the deficit. So generally, the larger the deficit, the higher the chance of muscle loss.
Yep.
And also body fat availability of the individual. Okay, so an individual who is very lean is going to be at a higher risk of muscle loss when compared to an individual who is holding onto a higher amount of body fat.
Would that be also considering the body fat set point, like where they naturally started with their body fat?
Yeah, definitely. So the further you move away from your set point, the further you move away from your set point, the more weight you lose. That's definitely going to affect your chances of retaining muscle as well.
Yep.
But generally speaking, an individual with a higher amount of body fat is going to have a better chance of retaining muscle.
Right. So then, in that case, when we're looking...
So yeah.
Sorry, let me just cut out a little bit there.
Yep.
One thing I would like to segue into is when we're talking about going into surplus or deficits, I think a lot of people, when they see an individual, say the skinny fat sort of body composition, or just generally obese, in what situations would you recommend, when you first get a client, would you recommend going straight for a cutting phase?
Yeah, right. So it all depends. It depends on a few factors. If they're untrained, generally clients will be able to experience body recomposition, which is the process of gaining muscle and losing body fat simultaneously. So if they are untrained, I'd probably go with a small to moderate energy deficit. And this should enable them to lose body fat whilst building muscle. And this is because at that point they're going to be very sensitive to the stimulus of resistance training, which means their body is going to pull energy from fat cells to fuel the synthesis of new proteins and construct new muscle tissue. So yeah, it depends on their training status. If they are trained though, and it all depends on their goals too. So if their main goal is to lose body fat, then definitely going into an energy deficit. And if they do want to gain muscle, but they're holding on to probably a little too much body fat, then I'd probably go the route of an energy deficit as well, something like a mini cut, just to reduce their body fat levels and then transition into a gaining phase.
Yeah. And then in what situations would you consider a maintenance phase? And whether that's for a new athlete or a advanced athlete?
Okay, so a maintenance phase is generally useful after a long gaining phase, possibly before starting a fat loss phase.
Right.
Also, if an individual comes to you and they've been training really hard for a prolonged period of time, so doing extreme amounts of training volume, they may present with some type of pain, possibly joint soreness.
Right.
A maintenance phase is also going to be beneficial for them upon starting with you, because that's only going to reduce all the fatigue that they built up from training so hard, and definitely decrease joint soreness and things like that. So a maintenance phase can definitely come in handy for those types of individuals, and even people who have probably been trying to lose fat for a prolonged period too, and have possibly hit a plateau. Just stepping away from fat loss for a short period and embarking on a maintenance phase can be very useful. However, very hard for some people. Okay, lots of people are very good at restricting themselves, but when it comes to maintaining their body weight or embarking on a controlled calorie surplus, they can definitely struggle. So maintenance phases are something that I do talk about with a lot of my clients, just to ensure that when the time comes, and the need for a maintenance phase arises, that they're ready for it and they know exactly what to expect. There's no, it's just an easy process from there.
Right. And would you say, when we're talking about a surplus, at what point do you personally think that there's a need for a cap if we disregard psychological considerations?
Yeah, right. That's a good question. So it all depends again if the client is willing to gain certain amounts of body fat.
Yep.
But I think once you start to pass 15% for a male, 15% body fat, and start to get closer to 20%, that's probably when you're going to need to cut back and embark on a fat loss phase.
Yep.
If you're a bodybuilder, you probably don't want to be spending too much time close to that 20% range, especially if you've got a bodybuilding show in close proximity. So, I think anywhere between 15 and 20%, you'd probably need to start cutting back.
Right. Do you think there could ever be a situation? So, for instance, I won't mention a name, but there's a very prominent natural bodybuilder, very well respected. I absolutely love their content, and I think they make fantastic calls as a coach. But I noticed that they are and you might know who I'm talking about here. They're doing a very prolonged gaintaining phase, basically, sitting at a very high, a relatively high body fat percentage. Although they are a very lean individual. Do you think this could be Do you think it would be more efficient in the long term? We're talking on a scale of sort of 4 or 5 years.
Yep.
To either just sit at a relatively high body fat percentage and try to recomp up at that high body fat percentage, or more efficient to sort of do a bulk then a cut, then a bulk then a cut sort of thing? Yeah,
right. So with the whole bulk cut, it all depends on how long you're gaining for. So you definitely don't want to be gaining for only 6 months or 3 to 6 months and then doing a cut and repeating that. Yep. I think if you are gaining for at least 12 months and then following that up with a mini cut and repeating that process, I definitely think that can be very beneficial. But also the gaintaining approach that you also mentioned definitely has its pros as well. So in a fat loss phase, you're only decreasing the amount of time spent in a calorie surplus, which is very conducive to muscle growth. So I guess you could say you're limiting your muscle growth potential in that period of time. So as long as you don't let yourself, I guess, get too fat in that gaintaining phase, then you can definitely see some really good progress. But with most of my clients, especially, in the whole coaching world, it's very hard to get a client to embark on, a prolonged gaintaining phase. So generally they're going to respond better to, 6 to 12 months in a calorie surplus, followed by a fat loss phase to see, all the hard work, I guess, that they put in. You're only going to see that after stripping back body fat.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because then in the sense I find, especially for instance, I find personally with female athletes, I mean, I'm not a coach, but I have a lot of female friends who reach out to me, and I find the main concern that they have is it's always high body fat percentage. And even I just spoke with Corin Ingman, and even she had, she's probably one of the best female bodybuilders in the UK, and she has a lot of issues herself personally and just mentally with getting to a high body fat percentage and sticking there, because especially as a woman, you don't want to feel big or bulky or take up heaps of space and all that. And especially, this is something that really gets to me, because I see female friends time and time again, they'll come to me and they'll say, oh, hey, I want glutes, abs, and I don't want to be too bulky. How do you what is your general approach to this sort of situation? And is there ways you can sort of either convince them into investment phases and helping them realize that it's not very easy to get too bulky? Or do you think it takes a specific individual to sort of invest and take the leap? Or how do you go about that sort of issue? Because I find that's something that I personally find consistently not infuriating, but tricky.
Yeah, well, it is a very tough situation, and you can't really blame the individuals for thinking that way due to Instagram, fitness magazines, things like that. And it is a process that takes quite a bit of time. So, fortunately, I have a few females who are investing and, going through gaining phases. And the way I approached that was really trying to develop as much buy-in as possible by educating them on the benefits of going through a gaining phase, and how they can't really improve the look of their physique if they don't try to build any muscle. And usually, when I'm talking to someone like that, I don't really call it a gaining phase. It's more of just a muscle building phase, which requires, a surplus of calories, because unfortunately we're not going to be able to optimize the amount of muscle growth that we experience. As I said before, untrained individuals, yes, you may be able to recomp, but after you've been training for a while, then that's eventually going to cap out. So when a female comes to me and wants to lose body fat, then I'm totally cool with that. And as we go through the fat loss phase, I'm always educating them about what we're going to do after the fat loss phase, because obviously we can't just lose fat forever. So the first step is to maintain the body weight that we eventually get down to. And after I talk to them about the importance of maintenance, then I kind of creep into the importance of gaining. Okay, so generally these two phases, maintenance and gaining, are going to be a lot harder, as I said, for some individuals. And we know about 95% of people who embark on a fat loss phase just aren't able to maintain the weight that they lose, and generally end up gaining it all back. So planting those seeds, and talking to them about maintenance as we go through the fat loss phase is super important. And even giving examples of other people, other possibly people on Instagram who've gone through gaining phases successfully and have accepted the weight gain after a fat loss phase, end up looking better in the long run. So that's just how you improve your body composition over time.
It's like how something like 95% of diets fail. It's like, okay, I think this is why bodybuilding, I think, is just blowing up right now, and I think it has a right to. I don't think everyone should compete in bodybuilding, but it's like the general style of training, I think, is one of the most healthy styles ever, because it's pretty much the only way you can it's one of the very few ways you can actually make true body composition changes, and I think that, along with a mental shift, can fix a lot of body issues.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and there's a lot of protective benefits that come along with resistance training as well. Great health benefits too. So yeah, resistance training really is the way to go for a lot of people, and I think people are becoming more aware of that. We do get a lot of individuals that come to JPS from that high intensity training background who end up falling in love with resistance training because they do start to feel the benefits of it once they get going.
Yes, and I think the whole thing is they're effectively it's like they're peddling bullshit, because it's like they're trying to show you, oh hey, this is the hardest workout you could possibly do. But I think we've proven time and time again that's just not what makes a difference. Like, it doesn't matter how cardiovascular, how challenging it is cardiovascular wise. It's just if you're not progressively overloading, you're progressively overloading your heart doing something. Like, okay, cardio's fine, that's probably good for you, but then it's like, okay, you're loading your joints through ranges of motion that you haven't learned how to do properly. And it's just there's numerous issues. I mean, I barely know anything about F45, and all I think is just, it makes me sad, because I think it's the default for a lot of people instead of resistance training. And maybe it's cynical to think that places like that are taking away from resistance training, but I think especially in the female demographic, they go straight there because they see the girls there, they look like they know what they're doing, they have a positive environment, they say, oh yeah, we're all going to do fun, hit cardio together. But it's like, I don't think it's sustainable. It's like, who have you ever seen that's made a drastic change in their body composition just through attending Les Mills pump classes? Like, fucking no one. Or
that's right.
And it's just
the good thing is that those classes do get people off the couch, and they get them active. They can book themselves in and get to a training session. But I definitely agree with the fact that the exercise and the protocols that they preach to their clients just aren't very conducive to maintaining weight loss and just improving body composition. Yeah,
and it's just something that I personally, especially in New Zealand and Australia, I find intensely infuriating. And especially whenever I have a female come to me and say, oh, hey, can you help me out? It's like they always want to do an ab circuit or a HIIT thing. It's like, because I think they've almost been tricked into thinking that's how you lose weight, and not even understanding the basics of a caloric deficit. Like, I had a guy who, I thought he was relatively well informed, and then he said, oh, a caloric deficit is a pretty good way to lose weight. And I'm like, hold the fuck up. Like, the moment he said that, I cringed so hard, because it's like, okay, you literally don't understand the very, very basics. And I think that the fact that people still debate that, and like someone said to me at uni a while ago that you couldn't get shredded on KFC. I'm like, it's fucking hard, but you probably could.
That's right. That's
the thing that is infuriating.
Yeah, and energy balance is one of the objective truths that we have, in the fitness industry. It's proven by science. The laws of thermodynamics demonstrate that negative energy balance is definitely going to lead to weight loss. And I think with those lots of approaches out there just don't educate the clients enough. And I think educating a client is super important, especially if you want them to be able to sustain the results that they work so hard for.
Yes.
Understanding the basics of energy balance and understanding that cardio is not directly leading to fat loss is super important, if clients are to lose body fat and keep it off in the long run.
Do you think there's ever a place for things like HIIT, that instead of just less?
Yeah. So I definitely think you can incorporate high intensity interval training into a program that is aiming at improving body composition. However, it's important to take into account that high intensity training probably has a higher chance of interfering with your resistance training efforts when compared to low intensity steady state cardio. So the type of high intensity interval training that you choose needs to be something like an exercise bike, something that isn't very demanding and it's not going to interfere too much with your training sessions. Because remember, resistance training is the main component, is the most important factor when it comes to retaining muscle and obviously building muscle. So doing all these classes and inducing high amounts of fatigue is only going to impact your gym performance, your training performance, which means it's only going to impact your potential to build or retain muscle. So I definitely think you could incorporate some high intensity interval training, and I definitely have done that with individuals who just tend to like that type of training instead of just walking on a treadmill. However, I do stress the importance of ensuring that the approach that they take with the HIIT training does not interfere with their gym sessions, because that's the most important factor, as I said. And I definitely stress that to my clients all the time. But in most cases, I do just prescribe low intensity steady state cardio. And as I said, I now prescribe step counts, which individuals just generally accumulate, doing a slow walk on a treadmill or even just walking outside. So yeah, like if a client comes to me and does want to incorporate one or two classes a week, HIIT classes a week, then I'm totally fine with that, as well as if they're going to enjoy it, then I guess that's the main thing. But it just as long as it doesn't interfere with their gym program too much, I guess that's okay. And obviously I'll be educating them along the way as well. But sometimes individuals do enjoy a HIIT class here and there, so doing that now and then is fine, I guess.
Because I think there's an argument for both sides. Obviously, like there is benefits to HIIT training. Like I think I get why people find it enjoyable and interesting, but I just get frustrated at how much people think that is, or it's just how it's people's default. When it's intensely frustrating, but I don't like to. I try to not let just the frustration speak, but
I definitely think people are becoming more aware of the fact. Sorry, cutting you out again, man.
Oh no worries. I think it's a very frustrating thing, but I think there's not much point in just dwelling on it, because at this point all you can do is just display how much resistance training alone can make a difference. One thing that I've always found is a very interesting thought experiment, and it's almost the way that I've been trying to convince a lot of my female friends into getting into weight training, is sort of explaining if they can grasp the idea of weight and calories and how and the relationship between the two. Basically trying to say, okay, to get you into weight training and just to get them open to the idea, I've basically been explaining this. So if we keep calories the same, so let's say you're at maintenance, and weight always stay the same. So let's say, for instance, the person weighs 65 kilos or 70 kilos. Let's say weight is X, and then maintenance is X. And let's say we keep both those exactly the same. So whether you do more exercise, you equalize that by eating more calories, obviously. And then basically explaining the fact that if that occurs, and just in normal life, that's occurring. So your calories and weight are the same, and you're at maintenance. But then if we throw resistance training in the mix, for the most part, you're going to get smaller, get leaner, and just generally feel better. And would you say that is all that is true, or is there a bit more depth to that? Because it's something that I've been trying to experiment a bit with, to sort of try and use science to not, well, almost be like, okay, you say you want to be smaller, this is how you become smaller. You're not going to get broad shoulders this way, you're literally going to get smaller in every dimension.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely. Like what you said, I definitely agree with that. Even if you were, maintenance calories, resistance training would definitely improve the way you look when compared to some of the high intensity classes that people do, and that's just because those HIIT classes just don't provide the muscle fibers with sufficient tension to grow. Generally people are doing jump squats and very light weights. Those types of protocols don't really provide enough tension for your body to build muscle. And resistance training really is the way to go when it comes to that. And the thing is, though, a lot of people are attached with their scale weight. They want to see their scale weight shift in a downward direction, but sometimes the way you look without your body weight changing a whole heap. Especially if you're new to resistance training and you've just come off doing all these HIIT classes. I've definitely seen it happen before. Some very small changes in body weight can dramatically improve someone's physique.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I find relatively frustrating is it's just the basic facts that I find are hard to be realized. And it's like, if you look at someone like Steve Hall, and I think he's a fantastic example of this training style. And it's just there's no way that Steve could do what he does if he tried to do it like F45 or whatever exercises.
That's right.
It's like there's no way that you can progressively overload at a place like that. Like all you can do is just do it a little harder every week. But it's like, okay, what are you really overloading there? Like, as we went over in the podcast with Lyndon, like, there's no mechanical tension happening. Nothing's occurring there. There's no progressive overload. There's no long-term strategy. It's pretty much just go in and go as hard as you can every time, which is what I used to do in the gym. And then before I understood the concept of volume, all I would do is get injured week by week. I would just progressively get more and more injured. And then it's like...
Yeah, so that's another problem. It's that they don't track their progress. So how do they know if they're progressively overloading? So that's something that I find myself explaining to a lot of people when they come to me and they've been doing a lot of HIIT classes and just not tracking their progress in general. And I explain the fact that progressive overload needs to be present if you want to get the most out of your resistance training. Okay, so you need to be training hard enough, and your training needs to get harder over time, obviously whilst taking into account fatigue management and whatnot, if you want to see the most progress. And upon showing them a properly structured program, I think that really opens a lot of people's eyes up, I guess, because once they see a structured program and I run them through the weeks and how training is going to get harder over time, I think they really start to see the importance of actually tracking their training. And once they do it for a few months, everyone just tends to realize that it is so much better than what they were previously doing.
Yeah, and it's something that frustrates me about a lot of personal trainers as well. Like, it's frustrating when you'll see a personal trainer put someone on a leg press, and this is something that infuriates me for a lot, because I have a personal friend who used to be very close with, but he basically he likes to load someone up on a leg press and just do fucking 5 plates when they're like a middle-aged woman, but then do quarter reps. It's just fucking ridiculous. And I think that the thing with that I find is so infuriating is there's no method of tracking there, and even if there is, if you're doing a quarter of the range of motion, then it's just you're cutting out all the benefits effectively for you're adding all these risks for literally no reason except ego. And it's just like, why don't you just do some fucking HIIT then? Like, just go to F45. Like, I guess it's a step in the right direction, but it's like you're stepping in the right direction and then falling off a cliff. Like, it's blindingly infuriating what is happening in this industry. It's like people will do shit like that and then not have any scientific backing. And I guess, I don't know, it's just the industry we're in. But I hate to keep complaining about it, but it's just like, it's all I've been thinking about for the last 6 months is like, how is this still happening? It's like when slaves were a thing. It's like, holy shit, that's bad. It's like that. Like, it's for me, it's like, holy shit, this is so blindingly bad that it's just like, why on earth is this still a thing?
Yeah, well, I guess the only thing we can do is, keep doing a good job, producing good content and getting the word out there. Yeah. And that's what we pride ourselves at JPS. yeah, we're always, producing content and, informing people, of the right ways to go about your training and nutrition.
And that's the thing, though. It's like I wish people would follow more places like JPS, because it's just like when someone gets into fitness, that's not the first place they follow, which sucks.
No, definitely not. Yeah,
I wish it was, and I hope one day it will be, because it's like I think eventually the truth just plays out, and it's like the thing that I love about JPS is it's just pure morals. Like there's no bullshit, which I just love. And it's like I haven't enrolled in the mentorship program, but it's like I'm seriously thinking about it. And it's just like I know the cutoff was like a few days ago, but
Yep.
it's like I would never like I want to become a PT at some point, but I don't want to go and like I obviously I want it to be legal, but it's like I don't want to go and do a shitty certification that tells me outdated bullshit. And
That's right. Yeah.
That's the
Unfortunately, yeah, in Australia you have to do those, the Cert 3 and 4 to be qualified as a PT.
Yeah.
So yeah, even though they're not providing the best information, you still have to get through the courses.
That's the unfortunate thing, I think. And I mean, I wish more personal trainers would sort of think this way, but maybe it's just they don't want to. Maybe it's too hard, or maybe there's a barrier. But I find it quite frustrating. But I hope the tides are turning, and I think it is with people like JPS, because when there's like consistent results and consistent people not getting injured, people being happy with their results, fantastic testimonies, it's just like, what does that indicate? And it's consistently infuriating. But I hope that it's turning. And I mean, I'm probably more angsty in this podcast than I have been in recent. But it's just like I find ever since I first had the conversation with Jacob about F45, and then I've been thinking about it, and then I had it again with Lyndon, and now I've had it again with you, and I'm just like, fuck, like. And it's not like we're the only ones thinking this. It's like everyone in the evidence-based scene is like, fuck, what is happening? And I hope it hasn't been like this for like 10 years, and I hope something's changing, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one, man, because we can only control so much. Obviously we can't spread the word out to everyone, but yeah, we're doing our best.
Yeah. What would you say are the main, like, if you had to nail it down to the main things that you think, if we could distribute this knowledge to everyone, what do you think would the main things that would make a difference in this industry be? If everyone had to abide by certain laws or rules that are just fundamentals?
Yeah, for like improving body composition, or just so obviously resistance training would be the first one. So making sure that you have a properly structured program where you're providing, your muscle fibers with sufficient tension to grow, and you're overloading that tension progressively throughout the weeks. I think that's super important because a lot of people fall into the trap of just going to the gym, training super hard, session in, session out, training as hard as possible, and then, most of these people eventually hit a plateau, because you can only do that type of training for a certain period of time before, fatigue starts to accumulate, and then your performance starts to drop, and, you pretty much just hit a plateau. So I think making sure you have a structured resistance training program is definitely one of those things. Protein consumption as well. So ensuring you are eating enough protein on a day-to-day basis to fuel muscle growth is super important.
And then when we're talking, I just briefly butt in here, but when we're talking about protein consumption, do we generally want to take into account, and I'm unaware of this, but would you want to take into account the bioavailability of the protein, and also what sort of numeric guidelines would we be looking at?
Yeah, so when I'm talking about like protein intake, generally want my clients to be consuming complete. What that means is a protein source that contains all 9 essential amino acids, which our body cannot actually construct on its own. So we need to get those essential amino acids from exogenous sources. And in a calorie surplus, when the goal is muscle growth, I'd probably recommend anywhere in between 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram per day. Now, if we are in an energy restricted state, so in calorie deficit, and the goal is to retain muscle, we probably need to have a slightly higher protein intake. And that's because energy deficit itself reduces muscle protein synthesis. And when you are in an energy deficit, your body becomes very efficient at metabolizing protein, and it's going to be using a lot of the protein that you are providing it with for functionality, as opposed to repairing and constructing new proteins. So yeah, I would recommend anywhere in between 2 to 3 grams of protein per kilogram per day if you are in an energy restricted state.
And then also when we touch on the complete proteins, recently I just spoke to a friend about this before the podcast, and because she's a vegan and all that, do you think does it need to come from specific sources? Because I've heard Eric Helms talk about this a little bit. With his diet, he follows, and I won't quote his diet, but generally I've heard many people say that you sort of need mostly from animal products. Is that correct, incorrect? Where are we sort of?
Yeah, so I definitely recommend most of your protein coming from animal products. Now, if you are a vegan, you can still get most of your protein in from plant-based foods. It's just that plant sources of protein, it's generally harder to find complete sources of protein from plants. So in most cases, individuals who are consuming plant-based foods will probably need a higher protein intake to make up for the fact that they're probably not consuming a relative amount of complete protein.
Right.
Now, I don't work with many vegetarian or vegan athletes, so haven't really had to educate many clients on this topic. But yeah, I definitely think that those individuals would need to be consuming a higher amount of protein.
Sweet. And then also, what would be the other sort of fundamental laws that you wish the rest of fitness would sort of understand or grasp?
The importance of managing fatigue, not only through training, but also ensuring that you are getting sufficient sleep on a daily basis is super important. And just not running yourself into the ground when it comes to training, because suffering in the gym doesn't really mean you're going to be growing muscle. Like, the more you suffer, that doesn't really translate over to building more muscle. And I think a lot of people do think, that the harder they train on a weekly basis, the more growth they're going to see. But as I said, over time, they're generally going to hit a wall and hit a plateau. So I definitely think making sure that you manage fatigue through various different approaches, like having a structured training program where you deload when appropriate, and also ensuring that you are getting enough sleep in on a daily basis is important as well.
Fantastic. Absolutely agree. I think I've always been thinking about that question of what I wish fitness would know, and I think if they just knew those three things, it would be a drastically different industry if everyone had to abide by those, which would be fantastic. But yeah, don't want to get too soppy about it. I think we'll finish off there, but where can people find you? Where can people find JPS, the mentorship program, everything, Martin?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, Mr. Fitness with 2 underscores. I would also recommend following JPS on Instagram, so JPS Health and Fitness, and also JPS Education. We are, providing content to those platforms on a daily basis that is super helpful, to any individual, whether you are beginner, novice, intermediate, advanced. You will definitely benefit from the content that we provide. And yeah, like we mentioned, we're launching the JPS mentorship program. So definitely look that up. The intakes, unfortunately, are just recently closed, but they will be opening up again soon. And yeah, there's a whole heap of awesome content on the JPS mentorship program, which is great for anyone who is looking to become a better coach or just increase the amount of knowledge they have when it comes to training and nutrition.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Student Side Hustle. I would appreciate so much if you would leave a review if you'd like to hear more of what I'm saying. Then I would love if you would follow me on Instagram or check out my other social media, all linked in the show notes. And again, I would just like to say thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful evening and study hard.